Okay, so hi all. It's my pleasure to be here with Sudeep Bhatia, and this is a follow-up to our depth presentation about computational analysis on 100,000 choice dilemmas. If you have not watched it, I'm highly recommending you to watch it. And now I will move on right to the first question. So, Sudeep, again, thank you for coming, and I would like you to explain, please, your findings to an undergrad student from unrelated field.
Well, thank you first of all for having me. Well, I guess what my findings are depends on how you see my work. If you see this as a um, scientific discovery, then the findings will be different to if you see it as a engineering product, and that will be different to if you see it as an act of humanistic inquiry. I actually see it as an act of humanistic inquiry, so I don't know if findings is particularly relevant. But if I had to sort of specify some findings, some scientific findings, I would say that people describe their choices that they make in sufficient detail that it is possible for us to predict what they're going to pick and understand the contours, the dimensions of their lives, the important dilemmas within those lives, the avenues on which difficult choices trade off.
Very interesting. Cool. And so, can you please elaborate on what you mean by engineer? If you look at it from the engineering perspective versus scientific perspective versus the perspective that you gave us?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I think understanding that distinction is important to contextualize the contributions of this work, right? I find it, in social science, especially in fields that are psychology adjacent and maybe economics adjacent, behavioral science adjacent, we oftentimes expect researchers to have like a clean finding, like, oh, this is like people do this, like this is a fact, this is our little snippet of truth that we've discovered. And I don't think that's the right way necessarily to always approach science. I mean, I think obviously it's important to do some of that. We might want to, for example, instead of finding a snippet of truth, quirky observation about human behavior, maybe we want to just build a map. We want to go and explore the landscape and come back with a high resolution map, which is what I've done actually in my work. I built a map of the choices that people face. Now you ask someone who's a cartographer, explain your finding in one sentence to an undergrad, they're going to have a bit of a problem doing that. Maybe their finding is that it is possible to build a map. Maybe their finding is that you go and maybe there's a big mountain in the middle of this landscape that I've explored. But they don't see their work as a singular finding, rather as an act of discovery, an act of exposition, an act that involves a fair amount of engineering and technical skill as well, right? And that's kind of what I see in my work, right? So I've built a map of choices that people face. It has involved some engineering, right? Some technical ability. And for me, that exploration has also had a humanistic component. I can understand choices that people really face. I can understand myself. I can understand my world better.
And by the way, I have not restricted you in the amount of time for how long or how little you explain your findings. Just to note. Um, and tell me, please, speaking about time, how long these projects took you? Like from the beginning, I assume it's still work in progress, or have you published it?
Yeah. It's certainly a work in progress. About a year, I would say, a year of continuous work. Maybe more, maybe less. It's obviously my co-authors also worked on it. Yeah, it took. Yeah, I think a year is a good amount.
I see. And how do you plan to extend this line of research?
Well, there are many avenues. So one is I find the methods really interesting. Sorry, my daughter is home from school and she's
No worries.
reading a book very loudly. Do you want to
Fine.
come say hi
Maybe
to the
we'll
camera?
listen as well. Hi.
Um, the Eagles won the Super Bowl. It's a big football game in the U.S. And so today is the day of celebration. So they canceled all the schools and even our university
Oh,
is closed. Anyway,
Sorry or happy. I don't know what's the right way. What's the
I'm,
right?
I'm my kid's happy, so I'm happy. But that explains the talking in the background. Maybe we'll get to that when we talk about the challenging parts of our job and
Mhm.
work-life balance. Okay. How do I plan to extend the work? Yeah, good question. I think on one hand, I'm using the same methods to explore other questions in the sort of social and behavioral sciences. For example, I have a separate project that I was working on this morning that used similar kinds of methods to understand what are the kinds of social situations that people encounter in day-to-day life.
Mhm.
And again, the idea is to sort of build a map of social situations. In psychology, right? Especially in social and personality psychology, people understand behavior as the product of two forces. One is the force of personality, like who the person is, and one is the force of situation, what the situation is. Now, psychologists have done a lot of good work taxonomizing personality, but they've not done a lot of good work taxonomizing situation because, of course, it's very hard to flesh out the space of situations. And these methods can solve this really crucial problem in social psychology, where it is quantifying what a situation is.
Mhm.
And that is essentially what what I'm doing right now with the same set of methods. Now that's essentially applying those methods to decision outside of decision making, but within decision making also I'm also working on extending them to improve their predictive power. So can we use these methods to better predict people's choices? There's some technical problems there that we need to resolve. Some of it has to do with experimental design. How do you elicit choices in the right manner? And that's also something that I'm trying to solve.
That's very, very interesting. Have you mentioned before, just to make sure I hear you correctly, that you worked before our started work before our meeting, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like 9:30 here. I've been working since 5:30 in the morning. Um,
We will get back to this
we'll get
point.
back to the work-life balance problem. Okay.
Yes. So briefly going from your research to more general questions, what is the most pressing issue in social sciences nowadays, from in your opinion?
Well, I mean, there's research questions and there's sort of pragmatic questions, right? I mean, in the US, science is under attack and social science doubly so, right? So the Trump administration released a hastily um, compiled list of NSF funded research that, they believe is focused excessively on diversity or is a product of, woke, whatever they call it. Um, and you look at the list that they released, those presumably projects that they're going to cancel, and like 90% of them have nothing to do with diversity or DEI. They do have, for example, statements about demographics. They have statements about outreach to underrepresented groups, but the science has nothing to do. And they're essentially going to try and, I don't know what they're going to do, but my guess is they're going to attack this kind of research. And so if you're a social scientist, that's a big problem for you in the USA. So that's a very pragmatic problem, right? How to keep our institutions afloat in these times of
Independent, I will say.
sorry?
Independent, I will add. Like independent from outside pressure.
Yeah, not. I mean, we're not independent from outside pressure. We get a lot of funding, right? So how can you, you know, we depend very much on the generosity of our society, and
Yes,
um, and part of that involves convincing society that the work we do is valuable. Part of that involves uh, maybe finding sources of funding that aren't tied to state institutions, maybe private sources of funding. That could be one other direction. Anyway, but that's I think that's an institution level problem. Maybe your question had more to do with what kind of research should we focus on, and I
mhm,
think, in my opinion, the research that we should do should exploit the unique technological advances of our time, which are of course artificial intelligence. Many ways to do it, as you know yourself. The way I've done is the way I use AI in my work is I use it to understand people's experiences and people's representations. But you can use AI and contribute to AI understanding in many different ways. And if you're a behavioral scientist or a cognitive scientist, I think this is the unique moment in our field's history that we can, for example, make the best contribution to.
definitely. I have admit I agree with you with your opinion that AI is very important nowadays. Is that we should definitely use it and
I'm so
try to.
sorry. Let me just tell my daughter to. Yeah, sorry about it. She's reading a book, and I want to encourage that. However, like it's hard for her to not read out loud.
No, it's
Um,
perfectly fine to read out loud. Actually, we even have a question at the end about the books, but we will not
oh, that's
rush
good.
into it. And what is your vision for our community, let's say a certain 10 years from now, but or
Yeah, I mean, I think our community is pretty strong as far as social science goes and behavioral science goes. I think the people who study decision making, that's a very um, strong, strong group, cohesive group. I think it's an international group. It's a group that has strong funding, uh, uh, strong ability to fund itself, and strong sort of institutional connections. So I think our group is doing well. How will I expect it to change? I mean, I'll be honest, I think the trajectory is really, really good. I think the work that's being done is lovely. The opportunities that are available are great. I think the replication crisis has pushed a lot of research to be in a more positive direction. So when I was doing my PhD, when I completed my PhD, our field was full of sketchy and unreplicable, sensational findings, and we've really moved away from that. There's still some of that, of course, right? But a lot of the focus right now is saying, well, can we find eight things that are robustly true? Part of that isn't can we sort of innovate, not necessarily in our oh look we found this cool result, but innovate in the methods with which we go and explore results, and that's hopefully my contribution, right? I'm innovating in the kind of methods that we can use to tackle classical problems. Um, I also think that there's a huge emphasis now on sort of real world tests, behavioral intervention in the field, things like that. I don't personally do that research, but I think there's a very strong direction, and all of these things are interests that are growing and that will continue to grow, and I think that will shape the field. Maybe 10 years from now, if this kind of keeps going, I think what we'll have is a field that has strong computational and engineering methods for tackling behavior in the world, right? Like, influencing and understanding the behaviors that people engage with, in real life. So we'll move away from flashy, experimental findings done in the lab, right, which involve just like, one or two little cool manipulations, right, to understand really behavior in all its complexity, in all its beauty, as it manifests in everyday life.
so you feel quite positive about our future as a community.
I mean, well, if you control for the aggregate effect of aggregate detrimental effect on academia in the U.S. these days, and control for the, I guess, aggregate detrimental effect in general in the world. Um, excuse me. Breakdown of we're a byproduct of the Enlightenment, right? Our institutions, what we do, we are a byproduct of the Enlightenment, and there's a pushback against Enlightenment ideas, knowledge, learning, rational inquiry. So if you control for that, control for the weakening role of academia in society and culture, and you look at only our field-specific shift relative to those typically downward trends, then I think our field is doing great. um, yeah, so I'm an
Okay,
optimist from
let's
that perspective.
let's try to focus on the positive side. And moving from the future to the past, what is, in your opinion, the most impressive finding from the last, again, let's say 10 years, but
I
feel
mean, in
free
our
to.
field or more generally?
You can answer about both. Like
I
it's.
mean, more generally, obviously AI. I mean, this is just remarkable. It's probably the most impressive finding in the past 100 years, right? I mean, here
Mhm.
we've got an organism that can use language. Firstly, the first non-human thing that can use language, and then secondly, the first non-human thing that can do, pretty elaborate forms of thinking and reasoning. Okay.
Mhm.
Now you might push back and say, well, actually, it's just a pattern completion device. But if it's a pattern completion device, then we're pattern completion devices. I mean, the beauty and the remarkable um, development that is artificial intelligence does not depend on any theory of cognition. It's just a remarkable thing, and I think that's huge. That's huge on so many levels. That's huge because it changes the methods that we can use to study our research, right? And that's its impact on my work. But it's also huge because it changes our theories themselves. If you're a psychologist, I think um, it is a bit of an indictment of classical, let's say, symbolic um, methods, and I think it shows just how much you can do with parallel distributed processing. So it's a major finding, major
I would
advance.
say change the life in general, impact the
Oh
life in
yeah,
general in any
e-
domain field,
exactly.
basically.
It changes our teaching too, right? I mean,
Definitely.
you can give take-home assignments, but also
You
it's actually
can,
easier.
but you will get the
Yeah,
responses from AI.
yeah, yeah, true. Um, yeah, but it's a good thing I think overall. I'm glad to be in this moment in human history, and it's I'm excited to see the future. A little bit nervous, but mostly excited.
I see. And if we take apart the AI, what is, in your opinion, the most impressive finding, like research finding? This AI is also research in a sense.
Well, I mean, you keep asking me about findings. You started this interview asking me about my findings. I don't have findings. I don't believe in findings. Our field has been just trapped in findings. Like, oh, here's a cool finding. Here's a cool finding. Let me give you a TED talk. Let me give you a little Harvard Business Review piece. No, man. Like, real science is not about little snippets of findings. It's about developing theoretical frameworks, research infrastructures, complex systems of knowledge that in which each finding cannot be isolated. So I would say, what is the system of knowledge that we've developed over the past 10 years? Um, yeah, it's a good question. I certainly
Your
think
question,
that,
by the way.
sir?
Your question, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, you're asking me, I can try and tell you about a finding.
No, no, tell me about not finding, about
Well, okay, the most important, I would say, empirical or sort of scientific work that's done in our field over the past 10, 20 years is the work, again, in the replication movement and the scientific reproducibility movement. The folks who have shown, who have worked on reproduction, who've pushed the field towards more reproducible and replicable science, those people have had a bigger impact on our field than I could ever imagine in my case having, right? The the field has shifted, paradigms have shifted for the better. And I think that's very important. I think it's important that we recognize that human behavior cannot be changed by small, subtle manipulations that easily, right? Some little like prime that radically causes you to, become honest on your tax returns or, you know, whatever, behave radically differently in high stakes environments. And I think that's an important finding. Yeah, it's a null result or it's a pushback against prior work, and I think it's an important pushback. I think it plays a big role in re-legitimizing our science.
I see, and I agree, by the way. Yeah. Okay, so going from general questions about the research to perhaps more personal one, uh, and it relates to the 530, which you mentioned. How do you manage to find the work-life balance, if at all?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I woke up at 5:30 and I was like, I should try and go back to sleep. And I was like, no, I want to work. But then I'm going to be so tired in a few hours. And then my day is going to be terrible. And I won't be as good of a father. I don't know if I'll be as good of a husband. I don't know if I'm certainly not as good of a son as I should be to my elderly parents. Why? Because,
We will not tell them.
yeah, well, I mean, well, fact is, yeah, I think I work a lot, excessively, I would say. Um, Pathologically, perhaps some would say. It is sort of, besides my family, the most important thing in my life. And, it's not, I don't think of it as work. I think of it as like my passion. I can imagine an artist or an athlete, like imagine, an athlete whose life revolves around their training of their body and their uh, their nutrition, all that sort of like kind of ties into what they do, right? I think I take that similar approach to what I do, and yeah, I don't think it makes me a worse person as a whole because it depletes my capacity for empathy, for care, for it reduces the amount of time I have on my hands. Um, and but it's a trade-off, I think, and it's just sort of part of who I am.
Thank you for this very personal and honest answer. Uh, it requires, I have to admit, courage to say that.
Uh,
Um,
uh,
so you start your working day at 5:30,
no,
and
no,
when
no, 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 no. Mostly not. Mostly not. It goes in cycles. You know, I'm these days I'm very pumped about my work. I'm really, really excited about what I'm doing. Um, and you know, I got tenure like 3 years ago, and after tenure, I mean, actually, I had a daughter 6 years ago, and amazing, best thing in the world. I just wasn't able to work as hard, you know, when I had an infant, understandably, and then COVID happened, and again, work got distorted, right? Then I got tenure, and after tenure, I kind of like, it's like, okay, like, let me like, chill a little bit and explore different ideas and to work again. And so now I'm finally back in the work mode, and I'm excited to be back in the work mode. So this is kind of a byproduct of that. Um, yeah, I do on some level. If I had a little bit more of a balanced mindset, it would probably be a little bit better. But this is not like a whole. This doesn't happen every day. It's very much a feature of this particular moment in my life.
I see, but the bright side is that you enjoy what you are doing. This is
Oh yeah,
super.
absolutely. I wouldn't change it. Yeah, I wouldn't change anything. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's truly the best possible life. It's a life of the mind, right? Um, it's yeah, it's you have you live one life. You have one way to spend most, 8 or 10 hours of your day. You can spend it in an office, working for some company, trying to make someone some more money. You can spend it lying, cheating, deceiving people, trying to accumulate power. You can spend it like, you know, doing drugs and living a hedonistic lifestyle. Or you could spend it learning about yourself, learning about the world, talking to some of the most interesting people you'll ever find, scholars of all different types, poets, artists, thinkers, engineers, tinkerers, you know, um, the kind of people that we meet in our day-to-day lives are just so remarkable, such powerhouses, um, right? I mean, isn't it such a privilege to be able to spend our lives doing this and not the other things? So yeah, I love it, and yeah, I wouldn't change a thing.
So just to close this topic, when do you usually call it a day?
Well, I mean, childcare places very strong boundaries on you know when I have to end work. I usually don't work past like 9 or 10 p.m. and I usually end much earlier if I have to sort of pick up my daughter from school and take her around. Sometimes I might still try and answer emails even while I'm doing childcare, which is a terrible thing because I'm not fully present. Um, but um, but yeah, I mean, I don't. Before I had a kid, I would work like 10, 12 hours a day, 4 or 5 times a week at least, maybe 6 times a week. And I think after my daughter, it's a little bit more balanced.
So your secret to have a more work-life balanced environment is to have kids.
Yeah, it's very good.
I
Yeah,
I
it
also
certainly
think about it.
yeah, it certainly reprioritizes things, right? So before I had a kid, work was my most important thing. Like that was it. This was my meaning in life. Now that I have a kid, I'm like actually work is my second most important thing. My kid is my most important thing, and I think it's a good it's a I highly recommend it for people who are inclined in this way. You were going to say something.
No, no, just I was just adding first of all that I will think about it about having kids for the more life work balance, and second is you said it's the second more work is the second most important thing, but the irony or not the irony is that it's the most time consuming thing, I assume.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you love what you do, I don't think it's really work. I don't think work is the right word. You know, um, yeah, it's not. Yeah, but I love my kid. I love my work. They're both sort of things I nurture, things that I hope, that make me a better person, that I use for my personal development.
And tell me, please, relatedly, maybe the answer is that you don't know, which is also fine. If not academia, what would you do?
Yeah, yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of sort of computer sciencey stuff, data sciencey stuff. I could easily probably get a job doing that in like, some tech company. But no, I don't think I'd be happy. I think the closest to what I do outside of academia would probably be maybe writing, maybe some kind of creative work. I think I could see myself being an artist that combines, say, various technical fields, and mathematical and scientific and computer science type methods, with some form of artistic production. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know what kind. Not music. I suck at music. Not visual art. Maybe writing. I think would be something that I would like to do.
Yes, writing is also what we do, at least partially, in academia as well.
Yeah,
Mm.
if you call that writing, yeah.
And by the way, it came to my mind a question that I have not planned to ask, but you said that you would easily work in the tech companies, and I assume the tech companies probably pay more than what the academia job pays,
Yeah, yeah,
usually,
yeah.
although we get a decent payment, but still. So, did this cross in your mind? Is it somehow bothers you or not at all?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, obviously, more money. I wouldn't say no to more money. Like, if I had more money, I could send my kid to a private school and not think about it twice. Whereas now, sure, I could send her to a private school, but I have to think a little bit about it, right? So yeah, money would probably make some things better. Um, if I had like a ton of money, I could sort of bring my elderly parents to America, really have them in a nice, buy them a house right next to my house, and be I could be a better son that way as well, right? Instead of like commuting to India to take care of my elderly parents, which is a very, difficult thing to do. Okay, so yeah, money would help, but I would never pick money over what I do. In fact, I even think that I'm overpaid relative to what I should be paid. I like, a better life, a more authentic life would be maybe just being a struggling artist, being a struggling writer, and but actually being, doing what I do on my own terms rather than being committed to an institution or being committed to a some kind of source of, you know, like I don't think that the comfortable middle class lives that academics live are compatible with a passionate and authentic and artistic, um, and intellectual experience. I really don't. And so if anything, maybe I would potentially be tempted to have less money in my life. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, this is a super interesting answer, and I have to admit, I have not heard from many people, especially on a recorded meeting, saying that they think that they are getting a salary higher than what they deserve or what
No,
they. I assume
no,
that you're kind of joking in a sense, but still.
not deserve, but I think a life, a comfortable middle class life comes with a certain set of obligations, and those obligations, for me at least, are not without a cost. And I can imagine a world in which I get paid less but actually have a more meaningful life. So that's probably how I would clarify. I don't think I'm paid more than I deserve. I certainly work very hard for what I get paid. But I think yeah. I mean, think of it this way. Like here, let me give you an example. You've heard of the weighted prose heuristic? It's like one of those heuristics that people use to make choices, right?
Mhm.
So it's well known because Benjamin Franklin uh, um, used used that heuristic in, he proposed that heuristic for his friend for making a choice. And what was his friend's choice that that friend was really struggling with, right? I mean, I study important life choices. That's the topic of my research that started off this meeting. Okay, so what was Benjamin Franklin's friend trying to choose? Well, his friend was considering either sticking with his job as a priest or leaving the priesthood to take a better and higher paying job as a give me 1 second. Okay, sorry. I'll find you another book.
You can join us and listen as well.
Sorry?
She can join us and listen to the
Anna,
Benjamin.
you wanna join us? Okay, no, she doesn't want to join. I'll 2 minutes. I'll find you a book. Um, I forget his name. But Benjamin Franklin's friend was choosing either to remain a priest or to take a high-paying job as a clerk for an earl in England, right? Like, and you know, if you're a man of God, if you got into what you do for deep religious and spiritual reasons, right, and you're a priest for that reason, you know, your job allows you to obviously cultivate your relationship with God and also share that relationship with your congregation, with other people. And now someone comes and says, you know, I'll pay you like 4 times as much. All you have to do is manage my finances. I'm a rich aristocrat. You know, that's an interesting and tough choice. Um, and I don't know if it's obviously clear that a priest should give up their calling, their vocation, their life goal to go and serve some rich aristocrat as a clerk, even though it pays them several times as much more money. And of course, this debate is what motivated Benjamin Franklin to describe the heuristic that I believe we now call the weighted prose heuristic, or it's a version of the tallying heuristic.
You can add this question to your questions list and ask people and see what will be their responses on this question from
Yeah,
your research.
yeah, it's a good it's an interesting question. You don't see too many priests in our data set. I think people with real existential and spiritual crises, they don't go and ask for advice on Reddit, which is a limitation of our of our
Your
um,
data set, in a
of our data
sense.
set. Yeah, yeah.
And tell me, please, how do you find the research questions? I will not say to work on, but to explore.
Um, yeah, I think it's just what I find interesting. You know, I mean, it's also, of course, where I can get good data, what the methods are working with. So it's a combination of obviously what I find interesting, and I've always been interested in the topic of choice, and
Mhm.
that's kind of why I'm in this field. But the methods, like, hey, listen, when GPT came out 3 years ago, I said, okay, how can I use this technology? I've been working with language models for a while. This is a game changer. What can I do? Well, I thought that really the best way for me to do is to extract structure from language. So what's a good data set where I can extract structure from language? Okay, this data set. Okay, let me try and explore what kind of structure can I extract, and that's how I approach it. It's not a research question. It's more like it's a little project. And sorry,
You-
by the way, I do have a hard stop at 10 o'clock my time, which is 5 minutes from now.
Cool. Okay. So we'll rush up a little bit. So what is for you the most challenging part of your work, or not work?
Well, I mean, I do think it's balancing the work-life trade-off. Um, yeah, yeah, I do think it's balancing the work-life trade-off. Um, it's a, yeah, yeah, we've already talked about it, but it's I would say the one that I have the most difficulty with.
I see. And what will be your advice for, as a very accomplished scholar, what is your advice for young scholars?
Yeah, I think for them, I would say, find something you're passionate about. If you wanna get into research and academia, I think it's good to care about something, and that's what's going to really motivate you to do well. It's going to push you further, and obviously keep learning, keep developing, keep changing. Don't get complacent. As you get older and older, it's so easy to get complacent, get stuck in your field, stuck with your methods, stuck with your theories, and you spend the rest of your life just like promoting and defending that work. as I'm entering, the middle career start of my what's it called, the mid-career stage of my professional development. I don't want to do that, and I'm actually trying to learn new skills, trying to even try out new fields, right? Learn about fields like adjacent fields, and that's an important thing. And I think you should do that obviously from the get-go and keep doing that.
Also, last question to be on time. Which book will you recommend us to read?
Yeah, so I mean, there are many books you could read, science books, pop science books. I think there are a couple of books that are sort of science adjacent that I very much like. I think Oliver Sacks is one example of
Mhm.
someone who writes books that are science adjacent, um, and are deeply moving and sometimes even inspiring. So he's got, you can find many of his books, A Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, and Anthropologist on Mars. These are all books that he's written mostly about people with various neurological conditions, and then he explores essentially the nature of the human condition through their neurological defects. So someone who cannot recognize his wife, and that's, it's obviously a scientific phenomena, it's a clinical phenomena, but it's very much a way for him to explore the nature of recognition, explore the nature of spousal dynamics, and really combine the science with the humanistic inquiry that I personally find so interesting. So I recommend books by Oliver Sacks if you haven't read them already.
Sudeep, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. It was a great pleasure talking with you. Thank you for your honesty
Oh
and
yeah,
for your
yes,
very
yes, of course.
personal
Yeah, hopefully I
answers.
didn't. I probably said many things I would regret, but it's okay.
I
You
hope
can
for you,
edit them out.
but it was very interesting. Thank you.
All right, nice chatting.